5, 4, 3. On a Wednesday morning, the 7th of October, we'd be remiss on this episode if we didn't talk about the spree killings that were happening at Umpqua Community College up in Roseburg, Oregon.
Which is why our flag is flying at half-mast right now.
Flags across the state of Utah, in fact, in memoriam for those who were slain. Join us on our conversation today as we talk about the idea, well, the concept of guns and killing sprees and mental illnesses, all the extremes, and hope to find some ground in the middle on this issue. We'll be right back on Talking Point Live.
There is a place where the desert comes alive, where rain breaks forth from solid stone and gardens spring from blistered rock. There is a place with enough color to make a rainbow jealous, where boulders are bigger than buildings and cliffs are higher than clouds. There is a place that will straighten your step, tighten your grip, widen your eyes, and open your jaw. There is a place.
The Community Education Channel, serving Washington County for 20 years, covering DSU athletics, local high school events, city councils, the Economic Summit, Chamber of Commerce meetings, community events like Washington City Veterans Day celebration, and much more. Visit cectvutah.com for broadcast schedule and more information.
Welcome back to Dixie State University. This is Talking Point Live, and I'm Jennifer Kohler with my co-host.
And I'm Eric Young. Nice to have you with us this morning.
Yeah, we teach in the communication department, and we're just really happy for the privilege and opportunity of sharing our points of view with you, our St. George and Washington County communities. And we just want to make sure that it's clear that our opinions and ideas and beliefs we express here are purely our own, and do not reflect the point of view of the university or other public entities here in the county.
And we are, at this point, coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University in St. George, Utah. A beautiful campus, as you can hear the weed whacker in the background. They're working on this place about 24 hours. Well, every day of the week at least as we go on.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to be. We're talking about something we feel very strongly about. I've had some personal experience in a public shooting situation. Eric's got a lot of experience and a strong point of view on how we should be discussing the issue of guns and gun control, gun violence in our country. So Eric, what do you want to start with?
Well, it's a pretty hot topic and one that's pretty somber as well. We hope to treat it with the respect that it deserves. Our intern, Lindsay Larson, I hope I got your last name right. She's in the truck right now going, oh, you better get my name right. Was actually prepping out for the show last night. She was in a computer lab in one of our buildings here on campus. And while she's looking at all the images that you're going to be seeing coming up in our show, she heard what sounded like gunfire actually break out outside of her classroom. And in fact, the classroom at one point flashed with one of the booms that had sounded. And of course, she's in the frame of mind that she's of a spree killing going on while she's researching this and downloading the images that we'll be using for the show. So it was duly frightening to her, kind of a conditioning now that lots of students and faculty and staff are going through. She hit the floor, she crawled over to the door to make sure it was as secure as possible, which wasn't, and turned out the lights and waited while what sounded like gunfire continued on for several minutes, only to discover a little bit later on that here in St. George, this is the time of the Huntsman Senior Games, and their opening ceremony is held just a few hundred yards to the south of the classroom that she was in, and they had a fireworks opening ceremony, but she didn't know that. In fact, very few people know that. Last year, I was teaching during this time. The same thing happened, and I had this response of hitting the floor as well. But I felt bad for Lindsay that she had to go
especially
through
being alone like that in that situation.
Are we conditioned now?
Well, you know, speaking of conditioning and being terrified, I will share real quickly an experience I had in 1999 at the Family History Library in Salt Lake that the LDS Church operates. I happened to be sitting up on the second floor, a mezzanine, overlooking the lobby in the library, and I heard a pop, pop, pop noise. And I thought to myself while I was sitting at my desk, that sounds like a gun. I wonder if it is. And then I heard screaming. When I heard the screaming, I knew that it was a gun that had just gone off. And what I want to talk a little bit about today, later in the show, is preparation, having a plan for being in situations like this, because luckily for me, we had about 6 months previous in the library had some mandatory fire drills where we were hustled off the second floor, which is where I was usually doing research, hustled down this back stairwell. The whole floors were evacuated for the building, and then we were all taken outside the library as part of a fire drill. So when this shooting happened, and I knew what it was based on the screaming, I walked back inside the second floor area and was able to, in a very calm manner, consciously pretend I worked there, you know, as an employee, and encourage people to get up, leave their desks, and go to that stairwell where we had previously had the fire drill. So because I just had that little haphazard training 6 months before, I was able to react in a fairly effective way. So we're going to talk about preparation for being in those situations a little bit later in the show.
Not only
Yeah.
about the preparation, but we'll also get into perhaps something that we can do on an interpersonal level as far as
Yes.
engaging. Once we see or detect some type of threat escalation, this is an area of research that I've been involved in for a number of years, and kind of where my background goes to. So those two things, what we can do to prepare and how we can maybe assess threats that might be around us, and maybe a solution other than more legislation when it comes to gun laws or letting everybody have a gun.
Okay.
In that respect.
Well, you know, you bring up a good point, the interpersonal aspect of it, right? Because the fellow that committed the 2 murders at the library was a schizophrenic, diagnosed schizophrenic. He had a mental illness. He had gone off of his medication when this happened. And so that's a perfect example of somebody who was known to have a history. So you do ask yourself, why was he in the possession of a gun?
How did
Yeah.
he get a gun to begin with?
Yes.
In fact, there's a whole list of individuals that we can ask that same question about. And I'm going to go to that list right now, Lindsay, if you want to go through and bring those up. And I'm just going to quickly read through these names as we see the images of them as we go. I know I've switched gears on you a little bit, but first off, starting out with Mercer, the Oregon shooter. Then we move into Dylan Roof. Next is Aaron Alexis. Next is Adam Lanza from the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting that way. Then into James Holmes, the Colorado theater killer. Jared Loeffner, the one who shot Gabby Gifford. Major Nadal Hassan, who was responsible for the shooting that happened at Fort Hood, Texas. Jiverly Wong. Sung Hui Cho, the University of Virginia killer, that was one that struck home with us. These are 9 individuals who would never have passed any kind of mental illness screening in terms of being able to maybe to possess a firearm.
So they were
In fact, there
identified
was
as having mental issues?
every
is what
single
you're
one
saying?
of these individuals,
Okay, okay.
and right down to Mercer, our most recent one
Okay.
as well. Mercer actually was, before attending Umpqua Community College, was enrolled in a high school that dealt with individuals who were somewhere along that spectrum as far as autism is concerned.
So did you just say that these people were identified as not being able to legally have a gun?
Well, no.
Okay.
If that perhaps were some type of a background, included in a background check as far as the history of mental illness, then they would have been identified perhaps as not being able. But clearly they were all on some level were able to go through and procure firearms.
But was that a legal or an illegal procurement from what you can understand?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
The majority of them that I went, these 9 that I went through, most of them had purchased firearms legally.
Legally, okay.
As far as the system is concerned, what they're
Okay.
able to go through and do. And of course, that's always going to bring up the debate. And we default to that debate very quickly when it comes to something as horrifying as a spree killer walking into a classroom or a bank or a hospital, wherever the case might be, and then opening up and killing people. Our first response, though, these days seems to be, oh, well, then there goes the gun lobby, and now we're going to get into a fight about the NRA. And instead of, this was a horrible situation, and the problem lingers on, and nothing is being done about it.
You know, speaking of nothing being done, I distinctly remember listening to President Obama's very emotional reaction to this latest episode. And at the same time, I'm reading a book called Think Like a Freak, which is written by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner, who is an economist, Freakonomics and Super Freakonomics. And they're saying to solve problems, you really don't want to think on a moral basis or an emotional basis. So,
and this is a very
yes,
emotional
it
and
is.
very moral issue.
It is. And so that does not help to solve the problem.
We polarize within that emotion,
Right.
Emotionality. I'm going to invent
Yeah.
a word here, but we all already have our standpoint.
Right.
We have our preconceived notion about where we are. The Second Amendment is a done deal, and to use an old Arab saying, and maybe that's unpatriotic to go through and talk about the Second Amendment, but the camel's nose is in the tent, and we're not going to get that camel out of the tent. It's not a matter of going back and saying, like Australia did, for example, we're going to take away all your guns. It's one of the founding principles of the country. Whether or not I agree or disagree with that, there's really not a whole lot we can do about that. But perhaps there is something we can do, both in preparation from an institutional standpoint and from an interpersonal standpoint, which we'll get to here in just a minute. I don't want to go there yet. I do want to get into the debate a little bit with
Okay,
you
all right.
about this concept of
Okay,
guns. I
all
asked
right.
you right before the show,
Right.
where do you stand? I don't know where you stand,
Okay.
and you didn't answer because you wanted
Okay.
to wait for the program.
Well, and
So-
I have mixed feelings. For example, when I was listening to the news report on the shooting up at the community college in Oregon, in Roseburg, I thought to myself, well, I would not be able to defend my students at all because I don't have a concealed carry permit, I don't carry a gun, and I wouldn't be able to do one thing to defend myself or my students, and that's frustrating to me. It's disempowering to me. But on the other hand, I'm really not excited about having a world where everybody's packing heat. So I have mixed feelings about how to respond to this, frankly, and I do believe that the Second Amendment that you brought up is it's a valid thing to be able to have citizens, to be able to have the capacity to have an armed revolution if necessary against a tyrannical government, which is my understanding of why the Second Amendment was instituted in the first place by our framers, so that we could overthrow a tyrannical, corrupt government if we were completely desperate. But at the same time, I think it's been, our relationship to having guns has been twisted, manipulated, maybe corrupted or perverted by some cultural habits that we have.
Yeah, it's become a real cultural
Yeah.
issue in that
Yeah.
respect. So Ben Carson said he seems to not be able to say anything without being called on the carpet. But most recently, just yesterday, in fact, he came up with a different point of view as
Okay.
to what should have happened at Umpqua Community College, and maybe even all the way back to Columbine as well.
Okay.
That those victims involved in the classroom should have engaged the shooter
Yes.
instead of just standing there and obeying the what do you think about that?
I
When you talk about
yes.
not being able to
Yes.
defend your students.
Right.
That there is the ultimate defense, and that is instead of standing placidly by, afraid for your life, that you actually
Right.
go through and engage the
Exactly.
shooter.
I
Is that-
agree. I agree that engagement in that there should be some pre-engagement on the interpersonal level, which we're going to talk about.
Right.
But when you're in the incident, I totally agree, and that's why I participated a couple of years ago, June I think of 2013, in a St. George community mass shooting exercise we held over at the Taylor Health
Taylor Health
Sciences.
Sciences
It was
building. I
very,
was there too.
very helpful to me, okay, to a basic understanding. And I remember when the shooter entered our classroom, my defense was to take off a shoe and throw it, which was not very effective, I don't think. But there were 2 or 3 individuals who were prepared to react when the shooter came, and that guy, I'm glad he was wrapped in padding because he was taken down in a very rough manner onto the floor by 2 or 3 determined individuals who were prepared to deal with him.
He cut me across the forehead with the side of
Were
his
you
gun.
in the padding?
I was the first tackler.
Oh, okay.
Your shoe hit me, I think. when you threw it.
I doubt that. I don't have that good of a name.
That was
But yes,
fascinating
yeah,
training. How did
it
you
was.
feel? The escalation, the point of were you afraid? Was it frightening? Was it?
Well, I was very clear that we were doing a training exercise, so there was not a real level of fear.
Right. We can't
for
equate
me.
that to the unknown of actually
Right.
having to engage
Right.
an active shooter.
But I did find it was very thought-provoking, I would say that, and left an imprint on my mind, especially we were hiding in a dark area, being quiet, waiting for the building to be cleared. So it definitely left an impression on my mind.
It
for sure.
escalated a little bit of some kind of anxiety with you. It did with me.
Yeah.
As we talked it out.
Uh-huh.
The other individual was it was our previous soccer coach, I think, that I
Okay.
was with
Okay.
during this training, and we said, I'll take the top, you take the bottom. As soon as he walks in the door, and we flanked the door, so when he came in, if he got one of us with the gun, then the other one would still be able to go through and engage and pull him down. I went for the arm on the top part and moved with the arm away. He engaged at the bottom, took out his knees, boom, down he went. And it was a good thing
Yeah.
that he had some padding.
Yes.
He managed to go across the top of my forehead with the sight of the gun
Uh-huh.
or the item that he had in his hand and cut my head open. But that aside, we can't really depend on that as true contextual training.
Okay.
When we hear that bang, 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 we don't even know what that sounds like, in fact, within
Yeah.
any classroom that we are in. And in fact, unfortunately, most of the classrooms that we teach in the Udvar-Hazy building or in the Jennings building, we don't have the ability to even secure those
We don't.
rooms. Just
We can't
yet.
lock the doors from the inside. We usually typically only have one door to get in and out of a classroom.
Which makes
Yeah.
that classroom,
Yeah.
there's no way out.
Right.
You know, in a situation where somebody might be going through it
Yeah.
and posing some kind of a threat to us that
Yeah.
way. So I had the conversation with my students yesterday. If this happens, I am prepared and I have training.
Yeah.
Aside from what we've gone through, I have previous training
Okay.
besides that. But we can't stand idly by.
Right.
We have to engage with what's going on. Is that a conversation you're prepared to have?
We're
with
going
your
to have
students?
that in my classroom today, and the best I can come up with, and I'm going to solicit input from my students because I suspect some of my students have some strong opinions and some great ideas on how to engage. But like I said, my first instinct is to throw whatever is in your hand at the person to distract that person, and then do a body rush, you know.
So you
if
think
they're-
a dry erase marker is going to take them out?
I think the more distraction, the
Right,
better.
okay.
The better. I think that can be very powerful.
I think your shoe
If
might
it's-
be better.
If it's coming from several directions all at once, I think it would be very effective. Of course, if the person is down the hall and not in your room, you want to turn out the lights and barricade the door as well as possible.
Tough to do though when
Yeah.
those doors open out and not into the classroom.
Oh.
We can't even barricade them.
Oh my
and
goodness.
We can't lock them, and that's the
Ew.
vulnerability that we
Yeah.
have going on there.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm saying too much here
Well,
to put that out.
well,
So what kind of institutional training then are we looking at? We're already halfway into the show, so I want to
Yeah.
move into maybe some of that content that way.
well, we did have a presentation. I'm remembering not this particular August, but I think maybe the one before that, where we
was a
had
year
a
ago,
pretty
right.
lengthy description of several aspects of the security on the campus. What I think would be helpful is to have an ongoing yearly, and I think if we had a yearly drill, like a fire drill, I don't think we even have fire drills on campus, do we?
What's interesting about the Washington County School District actually combined with the St. George Police Department,
Yeah.
they actually go into a school.
Uh-huh.
I participated in one of these
Okay.
at Mill Creek,
Okay.
where this happened at. I was
Okay.
teaching a threat assessment class there, and they did this drill. So the teachers all go to their classrooms, and while they're in the classroom, then an officer actually fires a gun off, a number of rounds off, as he walks through the school, so the teachers know
what the sound
that
is?
sounds like
Okay.
to begin with.
Okay.
And maybe that would cause too much of a disruption here for us to go through and have that kind of activity, but certainly it at least develops an ear. You have an idea. It's not just the Huntsman Senior Games fireworks going
Right,
off. You know,
right.
there's something else happening.
Right. So yeah, institutional. So I do think an annual drill, if not maybe twice a year. And then what I think would happen is we would be less, what do you call it, relaxed, more vigilant about,
probably the word.
yes,
Yeah.
about our safety and I think we have a false sense here in St. George, a false sense of security. Most of us do.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I had a student address that yesterday. We were talking about what can we do from a student level, classroom level, teacher level, and one of my students, and he's you know him, he's a bright kid. He
Yeah.
went through and said, well, Statistically speaking, the majority of our students here are concealed carry permit. Well, not majority, but 1 out of 5, statistically 1 out of 5 students have a concealed carry permit. So he says, I really don't feel that I'm unsafe, that somebody will go through and step up and be able to go through and intervene on whatever level that's happening. And I don't know that we can safely make that assumption, that within a classroom of 22 people, that 2.3 of them are actually packing a weapon and have the ability to go through and intervene.
You say the word assumption, and I think that's the crux of the matter. I think every instructor ought to, at the beginning of the year, have a conversation about safety with their students.
I used to start off the very first orientation day, and it throws a wet blanket on everything, I have to tell you, that if in the event of an active shooter coming into my classroom, here is what we're going to be doing. And students look at me, jaws drop, like, I can't believe we're even having this conversation.
Right.
Well, I can't believe we're having this conversation either, but we need to. It's part of the process now. Unfortunately, we are plunged into that. If we refuse to take any type of legislative action on this issue, then we have to take matters in a way into our own hands and become better prepared.
Well, and I'm not sure it's an either or.
Right.
Right?
That's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, and
certainly.
not only that, but the key thing here is if it becomes more of a conscious element in our thinking, then maybe we will do this pre-engagement, this interpersonal engagement that is so critical to identify people who are feeling alienated, isolated, and who have developed mental illnesses or huge problems that would make them more vulnerable to taking these drastic actions. So I think there's more than one way, right, to deal with this.
A number of ways.
Right.
I teach a class on threat assessment. We started doing this after the Sandy Hook elementary shooting that happened, and we engaged with the Washington County School District here, as well as with businesses and such, to go through and take a look at nonverbal indications of escalated threat. And that sounds pretty complicated. It's actually easier than it is, but it does involve a level of being vigilant, a level of contextual awareness. What's going on around me in terms of my building, my position, the people who are going in and out, the voices, are they recognizable? Is there an escalation in voice? Do we hear the sound of people evacuating quickly? We get too lulled into the actual sound of the environment, let alone where furniture is, fixtures are, and how they might become moved in somebody's rapid egress or trying to get out of the way of a shooter. How can we go through and respond to that? I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me go back to the nonverbal ideas and actually engaging individuals.
Okay.
It's there's a pattern, and I don't know that we can deny the pattern. As much as I'd like to go through and say these aren't individuals with a single diagnosis when it comes to mental illness, it's starting to evolve into 2 or 3 types of behavior, mental illness behaviors. So what that's going to do to me, at least, is become more aware of students or staff or faculty who might be exhibiting these kinds of symptoms or behaviors of detachment, of the loner kind of mentality, or somebody who quickly escalates into a situation, gets mad very quickly. I had a student a couple of years ago where that was the case. And I could see that he was getting very frustrated. He was trying to go through and execute something with a mouse on a Mac. He smashed the mouse during class that made students around him very uncomfortable. And I engaged him immediately. Went and took him by his arm and lifted him up out of his seat very kindly. And then walked him outside and said, "Tell me about the day that you're having." And we continued that walk. This is back when we still had student health services on campus.
Okay.
And I was able to take him all the way to the office and get him into a situation where he could talk to somebody better than me, who was better prepared and better educated on engaging somebody who is dealing with some issues that have made them become out of hand. And that's what I mean by engagement. But most of us don't want to go to that level. We don't want to engage the person who is a little bit different, a little bit off. But I just don't feel comfortable around this guy. And it's not a matter of feeling comfortable around them. It's a matter of going through and saying, I acknowledge that you're here. I'm confirming that you're in the room. I'm glad that you're here. I want you to know that I'm here as well, and that we will engage in a conversation, find a way to go through and not necessarily praise the individual, but to recognize, especially from a teaching standpoint, their competencies and what they're doing instead of tearing them down. Don't build up any walls. Get other people engaged with this person so he doesn't feel alienated. And then look for a reason to go through and act on any kind of psychological triggers that get him to the point of escalation.
You know, you use the he word too. It's
Yeah.
very, very gender-based, or
Because that's who's
you know,
doing it.
right. We were just discussing before the show. Do we have any examples of a mass shooting incident perpetrated by a female? And really, in this classic sense that we're experiencing right now, or this routine sense that President Obama referred to, we really can't think of an example of this perpetrated by a female. But what I really like what Eric was just saying about engaging the individual, from what I've been reading, is the people. Now, there was the schizophrenic fellow who committed the shooting that I was present to, but these people typically are feeling very isolated, very alienated and disconnected from the people around them. And Eric is really talking about establishing some sense of connection to that person. And I think that is really critical. And I get what he's saying about it not being part of our, you know, in our comfort zone at times to do that. But maybe if we can think outside of our comfort zone just a little bit, we can have a huge impact on what happens around us.
I've written before that when the mass media responds to a shooting like this and they try to go through and interview people who knew the shooter, nobody ever came back and said, yeah, he was a great guy, or I mentored him, or we had a wonderful connection in Boy Scouts, where the case, nobody says that. And the reason why they don't say that is because those connections typically don't exist for these individuals. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit. When we say these people, I don't want to go through and say anybody suffering with a mental illness is a potential escalator to a point of going on a killing spree. Not at all. In fact, many sane people have gotten to that point and have executed the same types of horror within situations. That's not all where I'm going. What I am saying is, though, from an interpersonal standpoint, all we need to do really is open up our eyes and look around us and see who needs to be engaged. Regardless of a threat that's being detected through nonverbal signs, things of that nature, we still need to go through and say, I recognize you, I'm not going to ignore you anymore. Collectively, we're going to go through and include you,
Yes.
develop that
yes.
connection, so we don't have to worry about the concept of perhaps this individual escalating to something a little bit more violent.
So, and I hear you, I think maybe even talking about compassion.
Right.
And establishing relationships with people, respectful relationships. I think that that's so critical to people's health and well-being, don't you?
It's not rocket
Yeah.
science. It doesn't
Yeah.
require any additional legislation. We can all keep our guns if we want. It's just a matter of going through and noticing what's going on. Okay, so we're wrapping down the last couple of minutes. Something I want to bring your attention to, and that is I've developed a blog for Talking Point Live. And it's a place I think that'll be a little easier for you to access as viewers if you want to join the conversation. It's talkingpointlive.wordpress.com. You see that here, Lindsay. If you go through and scroll through that, there's a landing page, and then you see, as it scrolls down, each show that we've done, and I'll go through and post season 1 up here eventually too, but so far it's just our second season involved. There's a comment section on every single one of these posts, and if you watch the show and you want to have something to say, we would love to engage you in that conversation and see what's going on.
That would be great. And
Do you want to talk
also-
about our Facebook page as well?
yes, you can also go to our Facebook page and you can post comments and let us know. We're really interested in knowing what you think is valuable about this program, if anything, what you think would be valuable to discuss in the future.
Next week, we're going to be talking about assessing credibility, and we're going to be using presidential candidates as our models to go through and do this. In particular, we'll be talking about Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, and John
Kasich.
Kasich. I always want to call him Richens for some reason. John Kasich. And maybe we'll talk about Jason Chaffetz's bid for...
Oh my gosh,
Speaker
yeah,
of
House
the
Majority, yeah, Speaker of the House. What about that?
That's a bad idea. I think that's what that's about. Anything else you want to say in 60 seconds?
Well, it has to be a Republican, you realize.
Oh, of course it does.
Okay.
Well,
all right.
At least
Okay.
for the time being.
Yes.
We'll
yes.
see what...
So it's not just that he's a Republican that gives you pause.
No, what gives me pause about
Okay.
Jason Chaffetz is he's not willing to be provisional and open-minded at all.
Okay.
He has his way,
Yeah.
and that's what he's going to do. As he
I
goes
don't
through
think
the process.
our representatives at Congress are known for being provisional. and open-minded.
No, we need to shake that up a little
Yeah,
bit. Hopefully
yeah.
we'll talk more about that here as well on
Yeah.
Talking Point Live. Thanks for joining us today. Please, if you got something to say, join us on the blog or on our Facebook post. And we'll be back here next Wednesday at 9 o'clock with a show. I'm Eric Young.
And Jennifer Kohler.
Have a good week.